you, Rich. Last spring, Keith asked me to help evaluate Dean Hager as a potential speaker, so I did some Google stalking and found out a lot about Dean. That's pretty amazing stuff, and I'm sure he won't have time to talk about all this stuff. But basically, he grew up in a small town in Minnesota and got his degrees in computer science and math, which is the language of the universe. So that really spoke to my heart getting that degree. And went on to become a software engineer at IBM, got 4 U.S. patents in software design. He wrote an article in Fortune magazine just last spring about how high schools should teach computer programming, which is near and dear to my heart. So far I really like this guy. Then he worked his way up to CEO of a company in Minneapolis, and did that for a while, many years, and then he stepped down, took a year off, and did the Ironman that Rich mentioned. If you don't know, an Ironman is a 2.6 mile swim, then 2.4 miles, so thank you, Ryan, and then a 112 mile bike ride, and a 26.2 mile run all in one day. So it's pretty amazing accomplishment for any human to do that. And he successfully did that. And there's actually a video I put on our Facebook page today. You can watch a professional video about his efforts and what happened with the end of the accident. Long story, but go to our Facebook page if you want to see that. Anyway, he said it would take him a lot to get him back in high tech, but he couldn't resist Jamf because Jamf is a great company. He wanted to do that. So he's the new CEO of Jamf as of May of 2015. But he's not limited to just computers and athletics. He's also on the board of directors at Bethel University, and he's the chairman of the board at Brook Church. And you guys heard of Brook? It's the 8th largest church in the entire country right now. But he's not just a figurehead chairman, he's a spiritual leader there. There's a guy named Bob Merritt who's been the senior pastor for 25 years, who wrote a book and mentions Dean in the book, and this is on the internet, which I found. And he credits Dean with confronting him and basically setting him on a course to restore his ministry, restore his life. And Bob Merritt compares Dean's to the prophet Nathan confronting King David, so that's pretty big stuff.
I haven't even read that.
Anyway, it's in a book too. From math to computers to athletics and business success and spiritual courage, I'm sure Dean has a lot for us to hear today. So please welcome Mr. Dean Hager.
Thank you. It took me all weekend to post all that stuff. Let me just start by saying thank you, and thank you for everybody that has come today. It's a little bit intimidating that you have all decided to take an hour of your day and just listen to whatever I have to say. So let me start with the most important point of the day, and that is I'm an incredibly flawed human being, incredibly so. And I've been in leadership positions most of my life, dating all the way back to when I was a kid. And I've been leading within companies officially since 1993 when I stepped into my first management position. And let me just say, I screw up every day. Every day. And I've had some screw-ups in my leadership life that most of you probably, or some of you, can't even imagine. And every day, or almost every day, I begin my day much like I began it this morning, on my knees before I go to work, asking for forgiveness for all my screw-ups yesterday and asking to be molded into the type of leader that God wants me to be today. And then I go to work and I screw up again and I have to go right back to the drawing board the next morning. So I don't have all the answers for you. As a matter of fact, I don't know that I have any of the answers for you, which is why it's a little bit intimidating that you came here today just to listen to me. But I do have some experience. And I thought that I would just take a little bit of time and tell you a little bit about my leadership journey. And if for some crazy reason any of it has impact on any of you, then that's just God's grace at work. Because I'm on this journey with you. All of us are here to talk about leading, and leadership is a journey. And I may sound at times like I'm preaching to you, but I'm with you. I'm in this journey with you. So why don't I start by where my leadership journey began. My leadership journey began in my hometown. I grew up in a hometown of Ormsby, Minnesota. Population 152 until I left, and it was about 151 for about 20 years. Not a lot of people come and go, and as with most kids, when I was 15 years old, I spent my time working on the farms, doing many different types of jobs for local farmers. The one that I had the first experience in leadership was something called rock picking. And I don't know if all of you have had experience rock picking, but generally it's actually a wonderful metaphor of life. Every year you go out and till the soil, and lo and behold, there's more rocks down there. Every year more rocks come up to the surface. And so the local farmers, I don't think they do it as much anymore, but they hired all the local kids back in the 1970s and 80s to load up into a pickup and go out into the field, and the farmer would drive the tractor and all the kids would sit on the wagon, and he would drive through the field and he would point out the rocks that we were missing, and we would jump off the wagon, run, go get the rock, come in, throw it back on the wagon, and jump back on the wagon again. And I had earned favor with this local farmer that I had worked for. And one day he said, "You know, Dean, I don't know that I need to come out here anymore. Why don't tomorrow morning you get the pickup and you go pick up everybody and you drive the tractor?" It was my first promotion. Okay, I got promoted to that tractor seat of honor. And by the way, the kids that I was going to go pick up were my brothers and my friends, which was somewhat of an issue. And the only parallel I can think of is Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And the tractor was my multicolored coat, and they didn't like it. Because when I got on that tractor seat, I was in charge. And as I was driving through, just to make matters worse, oh, I loved it too. There's one over there, you know, there's one over there. And my friend, "Oh, you missed one, better turn around and go back and get that again." And they didn't so much appreciate that, and I didn't much care, because I was very excited about that very first paycheck that I was going to get, because who knew what my salary increase would be. And I opened up that first paycheck after being the boss, and lo and behold, my pay was the exact same it was before. It was $3.25 an hour. It didn't change a lick. And I went to my dad to ask him for advice, and he gave me the same advice that he always gave me, which was there are a few problems that working harder won't solve. So he was no help whatsoever. And I rolled my eyes at him. And by the way, fast forward 30, 40 years, and my kids hear that all the time from me. But at the time, my dad wasn't making any sense. So I decided I had to go speak with this farmer. And I made my case to him. And he said, "I see your point. I get it. Okay." That's all he said. And I went and got the pickup. I got the kids. We went out to the field. And during our lunch period, the farmer showed up in his own pickup, and he came down to where we were all eating lunch, and he said, "Hey kids, Dean talked to me this morning, and he's kind of upset that you all make the same. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dock all your pay to $3 an hour, and Dean's going to make $3.25. It's a true story. And then he got in the pickup and he drove away. So all afternoon, I'm on a tractor with my back to my brothers and friends on a trailer of rocks. So you can imagine what my afternoon was like, and it was my first labor negotiations, and it wasn't pretty. And after that day at work, I drove back to the farmer, his name was Alan, and I begged him to reestablish the salaries to $3.25, and you can pay me whatever you want, I don't care. And I made a couple decisions that day. One is my first leadership lesson. Rule number one to leadership, if you are managing people, don't screw up their pay. Do not screw up their pay. Everything else is screw-upable, but you can't screw up their pay. Number two is sort of developed a philosophy in life not to complain about my pay. And I held that through almost all of my professional career, except for one time. But I'm going to tell you about that in a little bit. But in general, work for somebody you have faith in, and have faith in what they pay you and that it's going to be fair. And if you don't have faith in who you work for, then you probably should change employers and go work for someone that you do trust and you do have faith in. In any case, that was a summer job for me. And frankly, at the time, I thought it was my life. I thought it was my future. I didn't know anybody that had gone to college. I certainly didn't know anybody that had graduated from college. In my little hometown, I don't think a single person had ever attended college. And to my father, going to college, there were only two reasons. You were either trying to avoid work or avoid the draft. Never mind that there wasn't a draft at that time. That was a detail that was not important to my dad. But it just wasn't something that you did. You grew up, you graduated, and you went and worked on the farms, or you drove truck, and that's what I thought my destiny was. And then I was in high school one day, and an Apple IIe computer got wheeled into the room. I had never seen a computer before. And I took a book and I taught myself how to program, and I took a programming class, which is one of the reasons why I believe that programming should be taught in high school, and it changed my life because I probably wouldn't have looked at the computer again, except for it happened to be my football coach that wheeled it in, and so I listened to him, but I didn't listen to anybody else. I wasn't much of a student. And he came in one day when I was programming, and he said, people do this for a living. Maybe you should think about doing this for a living, but you got to go to college. And so I went home and broke the news to my dad that I had to go to college and that I wouldn't be working right after high school. And 3 years after the first day that I saw that computer, that I thought I was going to be a farmer or a truck driver, I had a night job in college, paid programming job, where I was programming for NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. Just imagine what can change in a 3-year period when you're exposed to something. And 3 years later, I was employed by IBM. And I had already filed for my 4 patent applications, and they were all granted. And I was 22 years old. Couldn't imagine what happened between the time I was sitting in that tractor and just a few years later at 22 years old. 3 years later, somebody from IBM, a manager from IBM, came up to me and he said, "Do you want to be a manager here at IBM?" Now, one might think that I would have had the same reaction that I did the day that the farmer came to me when he was promoting me to the tractor seat. However, at IBM at the time, entering management wasn't necessarily always a compliment. It meant that maybe you weren't such a great programmer and there might be another career path for you. And at least the other technical folks generally saw it, sometimes management, as a cop-out. And as a matter of fact, there was a tradition at IBM at the time that if you went to management school, which there was a 2-week IBM management school, when you came back, you would come to work the first day with a Band-Aid on your forehead, and it would symbolize the frontal lobotomy that you had at IBM management class, because you no longer spoke for yourself, you didn't have a mind of your own, you spoke for the man, if you will. And so I decided, maybe I want to give management a try. I thought it was a little bit silly that I would go to school for 4 years to learn how to program, and then program for 3 years, and then enter management and go to school for 2 weeks to learn how to manage. So I asked IBM if they would put me through school through a graduate degree in management and leadership, and they agreed to do that. And so I got quite interested in that path. But then I went to a couple of mentors that I had at IBM. Brian Truskowski was one gentleman's name. The other gentleman was Ken Johnson. They were both in upper management at IBM. And I said, "Do you have any advice for me?" I was presented with 2 management opportunities at the time, and I was trying to decide which one I should take. And Brian Truskowski gave me advice that I've actually followed all the days of my career. I can't advise it to everybody. It's just something that worked for me. He said, when presented with 2 opportunities, take the job that you know the most about and have the greatest chance of success, and put it aside and accept the other position. And I thought that was a little odd, and he explained to me that you will be incredibly well-rounded one day if you are constantly stretching yourself. So I did that, and I accepted the other position, the position that I really didn't know a whole lot about. And then I went to Ken Johnson, who was another mentor, and I said, "Do you have any advice for me?" And I don't know if you looked at the title of my presentation today, but his advice was the title, "Don't Act Like a Manager." I went, "Don't act like a manager. Wow, that's brilliant. What do you mean by that?" And he said, "That's what you're going to have to figure out." And that was about as helpful as my dad had been, years earlier. I had no idea what he was talking about, and he literally left it hanging. For me, this was like, the line Rosebud at the end of Citizen Kane. What's the mystery of the big line, "Don't act like a manager"? And initially what I thought he meant is, don't lose your technical skills. Don't become that non-technical manager. Go in there and stay technical even though you're entering into management. And so that's what I attempted to do. I found out a few weeks after I accepted my job that I was, at the time, IBM was a company of 400,000 employees, and I was the youngest manager in the United States at the time. And that should have scared me. It didn't, because I was young and kind of cocky. And it didn't scare me 3 years later when I was asked to step into second-line management and take an organization of about 150 people. And I had learned shortly after that I was the only person in the world at IBM at that level under the age of 30. Once again, that should have been something that I found incredibly intimidating and scary, and actually was a character flaw that I didn't. I should have been a little bit more aware. By the way, by the time I was in that position at IBM, I had sort of changed my perspective on what don't act like a manager meant, and I thought that it meant be a leader, not a manager. We've all heard that, right? You know, are you a manager or a leader? To be perfectly honest, over the years, I don't really care for that phrase all that much, because I think it cheapens the role of a very important function that occurs within organizations, and managers have a role to play, and that's an important job to do. But at the time, I thought, yeah, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to lead. And so I tried to polish some of my softer skills, you know, speaking in front of people. I once went, as I was pursuing my graduate degree, at the time I wasn't so comfortable speaking in front of people. And I was always reminded of a Jerry Seinfeld line that he once delivered, where he said, the greatest fear in the United States is public speaking. The second greatest fear is death, which means that most people who go to a funeral want to be in the box instead of giving the eulogy. And that was me. You know, I did not want to give the eulogy. I did not want to speak in front of people. And it was actually in my graduate degree that during a speech class that I went up to the professor afterwards, and I asked her, I said, how did you get so natural at this? You know, tell me what to do. And she said, embarrass yourself for 5 years. Just go out and grab every opportunity that you can until it just feels completely natural. And man, did I ever embarrass myself for 5 years. I followed that good advice as well. But I felt that in that role that I was at IBM, that it was about leadership and not management. That's how I interpreted Ken Johnson's advice. I would interpret it differently years later, but at the time, I felt like my career was on a skyrocket, and I was destined for one spot, and that was, you know, the CEO job at IBM. You know, that was what my thinking was at the time. Now, that was what was happening externally in my life. What was happening internally was something a little bit different. I was married to my college sweetheart, who is still the love of my life, at the age of 22, right out of college. And about 3 weeks before our wedding, she had an episode where she fainted, and she got up. And when she woke up, her pulse was very, very fast. She was hyperventilating, and it was almost like a seizure. We didn't know what it was. And it sent her into a several-week period of just staying on the couch and being afraid to move. It was everything we could get to get her off the couch and actually to our wedding, where we got married 3 weeks later. And we went on our honeymoon, and we came back and we went straight to the doctor because something was wrong. She was waking up every day convinced that not only that would be the day that she would die, but that she was dying at that moment. If you can imagine that sort of fear in your life, you know, think about if you were having a heart attack and you knew you were having one, or if a truck was coming and it was about ready to hit you, the surge of adrenaline that you would have for your body. That's what she lived every day. In her brain, that's what she was convinced was happening. And the language panic attack or agoraphobia or any of the things that she's since been diagnosed with were not common language in 1989. We didn't know what it was. But we saw a lot of doctors. And unfortunately, if you know anybody, and I'm sure in the room this size, there might be somebody in the room that experiences this, or certainly has somebody in your life that has experienced this. She was only able to function in areas where she felt safe. And she felt safe with me, and she felt safe with one other friend, and that was it. And so we were caregivers. She no longer was driving. She was almost housebound at the time as we were seeking these treatments. Now, the friend that she felt safe around, her husband was a co-worker of mine at IBM, and they were just the greatest couple ever. His name was Pete, and he had the annoying habit of asking me, you know, where are you at with God? What do you mean, where am I at with God? Where's God? I don't know where he is. And he said, well, do you know Jesus? And that irritated me as well. I said, I know Jesus' name. I heard it all the time in the garage from my dad growing up. I heard it over and over and over again. But I don't know him. I don't know who you're talking about. And he said, well, have you ever read the Bible? And I said, no, I haven't read a word of the Bible. He goes, would you like to read it? I said, well, that might be kind of an interesting exercise. He goes, well, we can read a chapter every single day, and then we can find time to talk about it. I said, well, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to make some time out of my day to talk about a chapter of the Bible. And he said, is there any way, any slice of your day, I'll go anywhere and do anything. And as you've heard, I'm an avid runner. And I said, well, over lunch every day I run 6 miles. I said, if you're willing to run 6 miles with me every day, you can talk all you want about anything you want, because I'm not much of a talker, I'll listen to you. He said, I'm in. For the next 4 years, he ran with me every day over lunch, where we talked about whatever chapter. It took us 4 years to get through the entire thing. Some days we missed, but most days we had it. And he shared his perspective. I asked questions, I challenged him, we fought, we did everything. By the way, fast forward, Pete has had hip replacements today. Okay, that's how dedicated he is to evangelism. All right, I mean, he gave it up to run with me every day and work through these questions that I had. Now, little did I know at the time that my wife was going through the same type of exercise with Pete's wife. And eventually, she and I started talking about it, and we were just resistant to making any change in our life. And it was around the time that I became a second-line manager at IBM that we decided to go. We went on a date. We went to a restaurant together. And I just said, where are you at with this thing? And she told me where she was at. And she told me that the life change that she had been feeling, which, by the way, if you do suffer from panic attack or agoraphobia or depression, or if you have a spouse that does, or a daughter or a son, there's hope. Because, by the way, for the last 20 years, Jenny and I have lived just open and normal and adventurous lives. She got over it, but there was a 5-6 year period that I thought we were going to be a slave to this thing forever. So hope is there. And she told me that she was finding hope in the relationship that she was beginning to develop, or at least the knowledge that she had that she was actually created by somebody. And I told her that over the last 4 years of reading the Bible, pretty much every objection that I had eventually got knocked down, and that I thought I was ready. To me, it was an intellectual exercise that became a heart exercise. And so we actually, at the restaurant, held hands together and we prayed together, and we made a commitment on that day together to become followers of Christ. Now, that created a conflict in my life, because everything in my work life was, frankly, at the time, achievement, and it was ego building. But everything in my personal life was a spirit speaking to me and saying, you shouldn't have an ego. It's all about humility. And frankly, I think that is the greatest leadership challenge that exists, is with every bit of accomplishment, it naturally hits your ego. But the only way to be a great, to be a great leader is to be selfless and humble. And fighting that battle, I call it the leadership battle, that's what I began to fight. Ego versus humility. And it was about a year or two later that I then got a telephone call. A software company in Minneapolis had seen me speaking at a technology event. And they said, we really think that we have a marketing department here that we would like you to come run. It's 2 marketing people. We're a bigger company, about $300 million company, but there's these 2 people. I just think that you have what it takes to run this marketing department. I'm running an organization of 150 engineers now, and I've never had a marketing class in my life. What makes you think I should come run your marketing department? They said, we really don't have any reason. We just think you're the guy for it. So, remembering Brian Truskowski's advice for me, of stretching myself, went home, talked to my wife about it, and we decided to take a weekend. We were living in Rochester, Minnesota at the time. We took a weekend and we drove up to White Bear Lake, and we rented a room in the Best Western in White Bear Lake. And we sat out at the pool that night and we prayed about it. And then we asked ourselves, why would we stay at IBM in Rochester? And my answer was, my career path is determined. It's already on its way. I have complete faith in it. It's money in the bank. And I said, why would you stay in Rochester? She said, I feel safe there. And then we asked ourselves, is that what's wanted for us? To just feel safe and secure on the path that we're on, or should we take some risk? And we made 2 decisions that night. We made a decision to take the job and not let anything cause us to look back. We did not want to look back. That was a Friday night. Saturday morning we woke up and we thought, we've never been in White Bear Lake before, maybe we should drive around and just see what it's like. Look at a house or 2. By noon that day, we put a non-contingent offer on a house in the neighborhood that we fell in love with. Later in the afternoon, we found the apartment that we would live in until we were able to get into the house. And then we went back to our hotel room that Saturday night, and we thought there's only one thing left to do. We got to find church. So we woke up Sunday morning, and I went out to the front desk and I said, I'm looking for a church. Are there any good churches around here? And the person behind the front desk said, there's actually a church that teaches Sunday school right here in the hotel. Their church is under construction. They're right down the hall. Well, that turned out to be Eagle Brook Church. Eagle Brook Church was a church of about 1,000 attenders there. And you heard a little bit about it during the introduction. If I were to fast forward once again, today it's a church of about 23,000 visitors every single week. And I've had the good fortune of being able to serve on the board for about 10 years there. It's frankly one of the most awesome things I've ever been a part of. I can't believe what I've had an opportunity to witness in the emails that I receive every single week that are sent to the board about changed lives that occurs through there. But that all started in the Best Western in White Bear Lake, where I was first introduced to it. So bam, had a house, had an apartment, had a church, we're ready to go. I went home and I quit my job. And shortly thereafter, we moved up to White Bear Lake, and we thought, this is the risk. I'm at Lawson Software now. This is the risk that God wanted us to take. I'm running an apartment, a marketing of 2. One of my first meetings, and for anybody that knows what marketing is, somebody used the word lead. And I said, what's a lead? And they looked at me like, what? You're our new department manager. You don't know what a lead is? I said, I'm a programmer. What do you mean? I don't know what a lead is. 2 years later, I was the Executive Vice President of Marketing for Lawson Software, which is not so much a compliment to me as much it was about the decision-making that was occurring at Lawson at the time. A year after that, I was responsible for all corporate operations at Lawson, and I had about 1,500 employees, and I helped the company go public. And I'll tell you, once again, the success that was occurring within my career created this incredible leadership conflict that I had, just battling every single day. Can I stay humble, or is it all going to be about me? And I started to get into behaviors in the workplace that I'm not proud of today. And one of those behaviors specifically was with a coworker of mine. He was also an executive with the company. His name was Eric. And Eric and I didn't like each other so much. He had a different style than me. He was the East Coast. I was Midwest. I managed about 1,500 people and thought that I ran the company. He had a department of 12, but he was very important strategically, or so he and my boss thought. I didn't so much think that, and I was kind of frustrated with him. And after we went public, what happens is all of the salaries of the officers of the company get posted publicly, and that was the first time I saw his salary versus mine. And I had that old tractor feeling again, and he made more than me, and I wasn't so happy about that. And so I did the thing that I swore that I would never do. I went out to dinner with my boss. Some of you might know my boss. He was here speaking September 8th. His name was Jay Coughlin. Anybody remember his story? Anybody here? September 8th? Yeah, I was meant to come that day. I ended up crashing my bike that morning and ended up in the Eau Claire Hospital. This gentleman here brought me, actually. So I missed Jay's speech that day, but he has a powerful story. And I went out to dinner for him. He was the CEO of Lawson, and I was the Executive Vice President of Operations. And I told him, Jay, you're making a big mistake with Eric. Okay, he is not what you think he is. He isn't producing value, and how in the world can you pay him more money than me? I was just a jerk. And he said, okay. You responded just like the farmer did. I got it. I hear you. And we went back. I went home for the night. He went home for the night. Next morning, he opens up the door to his office. Dean, can you come on in here for a second? I walk into his office. Eric is sitting there. This is a true story, too. And I had told Jay the day before. I gave him an example of Eric's ineptness. That we were in a meeting the day before, a big group meeting. And Eric did not contribute to this meeting productively at all. And frankly, we would not have gotten to the conclusion that we got to had I not been there to help facilitate the discussion. Jay started with, he shut the door. He said, do you both know that you're stabbing each other in the back? That both of you are stabbing each other in the back. You can't stand each other, I get it. But you're absolutely trying to submarine each other's careers. Yesterday, there was some meeting that you have both told me that the other person was inept and that you saved the meeting. And then he said, you know, I don't know what your problem is. And he walked over to the door and he opened it. He said, I just know it's not my problem. And he walked out and he shut the door. And Eric and I were in there alone. And I was enraged. I was enraged. Eric stabbed me in the back. Right? But what I didn't realize is that flush that I felt to my face was embarrassment. It wasn't rage. I got caught. I was a phony. I was not authentic. I behaved one way in front of Eric, and I behaved another way behind his back. And so Eric and I had a nice therapy session that day, and we really talked through things and hugged it out a little bit. Actually, we didn't hug. We shook hands, though. We shook hands. And then the next day, Jay called us back together again, and we said, hey, we think we worked through this. And in Jay's wisdom, he said, I don't think you have. Because I'd like both of you to work with a leadership coach. Somebody that will come in, I'll pay for it. This is, again, Jay's brilliance, that he saw something in both of us that he wanted to develop. And he said he would pay for a leadership coach to work with both of us and shed some light on our leadership styles. Now, I don't know if you've ever gone through this before, but I have another friend, he was mentioned already, his name is Bob Merritt. This book, as a matter of fact, that was identified here a little bit, was Bob's book, When Life's Not Working. And in chapter 10, I'm going to read an excerpt from Bob's book. This chapter 10 was called Everyone Needs a Friend. Let me read the opening line. This is Bob speaking. One thing I know is that every person has a dark side. You have a personality or character flaw that you might not be aware of, but they are there. I have them too, many of them. Some of us have huge cracks, gaping holes that everyone else can see, but often escape our notice. A question members of leadership ask, or should ask, is what's it like to be on the other side of me? It's a scary question to throw it on the table, because if your colleagues are honest, they will come up with one or two or three flaws that get in the way of your personal and professional performance. These are character issues, and I repeat, we all have them. The question is, do you know what yours are? Getting somebody to come in and shine a light on your life is incredibly valuable. And as I mentioned, Bob's his name was Fred, and as part of the chapter, everyone needs a Fred. So I was given a Fred, and his name was Fred. And it was because it was the same Fred that was written about in this book. And Fred entered my life. Fred was a PhD in psychology, and he was a professional leadership coach. And we sat down, and I said, Fred, how is all this going to work? And he said, well, here's what I need. I need contact information for your boss, your peers, your employees, any business partnerships that you might have out there, maybe a customer or two, your friends, your siblings, your wife, your kids. I said, what? What does all that have to do with work? And he said, well, are there two deans? Are there two of you? Are there three of you? Aren't you the same person no matter where you go? I was like, yeah. He said, well, then I need to talk to all those people, because only through doing that will I discover why you lead the way that you do, or why you are the way you are. And so I reluctantly gave him access to all those people, and he had a set of interview questions that he asked all of them. Interview questions like, what would Dean's worst enemy say about him? Okay, there's no positive way to answer that question. There's just no good way to answer it. And when he asked all the questions, he produced a written book of all the comments from everybody. It was over an inch thick. It took him an entire day to read it to me. And I'm telling you, if you ever have the opportunity to do it, schedule a blood transfusion or a colonoscopy or a root canal or an IRS tax audit, because they are all more fun. It was about as miserable a day as I've ever had in my life. And yes, there were some positive things in it, because he asked some questions forcing people to be positive as well. But wow, was it enlightening to hear what everyone in your life would say about you in a completely safe environment. And there were a lot of things. Fred went on to work with me for a year, and there were a lot of things that I learned from that consulting. But the one thing I took out of it actually branches all the way back to the don't act like a manager. And maybe what Ken was saying was, don't act. Be real. Don't be a different person the first day of management than you were the day prior to entering management. Maybe he was just telling me to be authentic. So I made a commitment to Fred at the time, made a commitment to my wife, made a commitment to Jay, that I was going to be the same person when I was around my college buddies, when I was at church, when I was on the church board, when I was with my wife, when I was with my kids, when I was at work. was going to be the same person all the time. That was my number one objective, my number one learning that I took out of this experience that I had with Fred. It was actually about, I thought it maybe halfway into my career. I considered it the perfect halftime. Fred gave me a halftime motivational speech for a year, and that was going to transform my leadership going forward. And I went on, I stayed at Lawson. I had many, many other leadership opportunities. Jay left, somebody else came in. We acquired a company. We grew to be $800 million. We acquired, a dozen different companies, so many different experiences. One day, I was integrating one of our recent acquisitions on the West Coast, and I got a telephone call. And it was from our new CEO, and he said, hey, there's somebody who's looking to acquire us. I need you to fly straight to New York and talk to him. And so I went from San Francisco straight to New York, sat down with a company who wanted to acquire us, and that was the beginning of what ultimately ended up being a $2 billion acquisition of our company. And all of the senior leaders were asked to leave the organization, except for me. I was offered a position on the senior leadership team of the new organization. I was very much questioning whether I wanted to do that or not. I thought that was the end of my time with Lawson. I'd been there for 14 years. But if I'm going to be completely frank, I was bought. I was promised money that I never thought I would ever see. I'm just a farm kid from southern Minnesota. What in the heck would I see those kind of dollar figures for? And I was bought. Not unethically so, just bought. And it was just a matter of I accepted. And it was just weeks later that I'm with now the new executive team. And we're at some high-rise New York office, restaurant, big round table, actually a round table like these, and there's 5 of us sitting around it. There had to be $2,000 of wine sitting on the table and the best possible food. And my spirit was just rising up, and this desire to be authentic was just rising up within me. And right in the middle of the dinner, I said, guys, I don't belong here. And one of them said, oh, Dean, don't say that. Yes, you do. I was like, oh, dude, you're getting me wrong. I don't have a confidence problem. It's exactly the opposite. This isn't me. What we're talking about isn't me. What we're talking about doing isn't me. What we value isn't me. I have to leave. I have to leave this organization. And I quit. And I went on home, and we decided that I was going to take some time off. I just needed to decide, where God wanted me in life. And then before anybody even knew that I had quit, I got a call 2 days later to be CEO of Kroll Ontrack, which is a Minnesota-based company, and I jumped to it too quickly. I knew I was being told to be still for a little while and think and reflect. Is that what God wanted of me? But it was an opportunity to go be the CEO of a $250 million company and actually lead it the way that I wanted to lead it. And it was a challenge, that it was something that I wanted to do. And I jumped and I went there, relatively quickly. And I was presented with all other types of opportunities to be authentic or do the right thing. And I'm going to tell just one story from that experience, just because it's a great life lesson. If you're ever struggling at all in an environment, whether it be work or faith or church or home or what have you, where you are struggling of what the right thing is to do, I had one of those experiences just 2 months after joining the job as CEO. We had a customer issue where we actually had some data corruption for this customer. And that was a really, really bad thing in the business that we were in. And one day, the person who led that division came in to me and he said, Dean, come into the other room, we need to talk. Don't bring Jeff. Now, Jeff was our general counsel and lawyer. And if there's one business tip, one tip in general I can provide you, if somebody tells you don't bring the lawyer to a meeting, bring the lawyer to the meeting, all right? So I went and got Jeff, and we went into the meeting, and we heard the situation we were in. We had already communicated to this customer about the data corruption issue. We were actually already fixing it. But the customer asked us to audit our systems to see if there was something pervasive and maybe there was corruption throughout our system. And what I was being advised at the time was, we can't do that. Because right now we have fulfilled all our ethical duties to tell everybody that needs to be told about the data corruption. But if we audit our systems and we find more corruption, we are obligated to tell everybody. Our company could be gone within weeks of us finding something. And I asked the question, okay, what's the reason not to audit our systems? And the only reason we could come up with was because we were afraid what we would find. So for a moment, I'm 2 months on the job. I'm trying to decide whether to make a decision where the company goes away within 2 months. And I glance around the room, and my eyes met a gentleman that was sitting in the room, and his name was Jay, different Jay Dornkamp. He's actually sitting right over here. And the moment my eyes met his, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And the reason why I did is because Jay does the right thing. And I knew I couldn't see him and not do the right thing. If you want to do the right thing all the time, surround yourself with people who do the right thing all the time. It will just eliminate those temptations from your life. And we ended up auditing our system, and lo and behold, it was okay. And we went on and functioned with a greater peace of mind than ever before. And I loved my time as CEO for this company. I loved almost every minute of it, except for the fact that I had this haunting feeling of whether that was supposed to be it, whether I was supposed to be there. And one day, it was March 6, 2014, I decided that, that was 25 years to the day that I walked in the door at IBM. It was my 25th career anniversary. And my wife, who I'd now been married for, it was going to be 25 years in just a few weeks, she had been the greatest encourager of my life. She has the gift of encouragement. She just boosted me up all the days of my life. I'm telling you, coming home to her every day was like coming home to a cheerleader. I mean, not the outfit. I keep asking, but she won't do it. But she has just encouraged me all the days of my life. And our oldest daughter was going to graduate from high school in a month. Here it is, my 25th anniversary. And I thought, what a great time for a midlife crisis. And I wrote a resignation letter, and symbolically, my wife hit the send key to send it off. And I decided, I'm going to take a year. We committed at the time, I'm going to take a year and be still before the Lord. I'm going to spend time with my family. I'm going to be still before the Lord. I'm not going to take a job. I'm not going to take a contract. I'm not going to consult. I'm just going to see what God would have for me. And I signed up to train for an Ironman. So spend time with the family, still before the Lord, and train for an Ironman. Those were the big three that I was going to do during my time off. Now, you can't really write what happened next. I got a phone call. It wasn't even public knowledge that I had resigned. I got a phone call a week later, and there was a familiar voice on the other end. It was a voice that I hadn't heard in almost 10 years. It was Fred. And Fred was saying, Dean, how you doing? You know what I've been doing for the last 10 years? I've been working on a research project because I believe that I have the data to prove. Remember, Fred is a PhD, super intellectual. He had connections with Duke University and working with data scientists at Duke University. And he had done the research where he believed he could prove that high character leaders deliver better bottom line results than low character leaders. He said, and I've documented these findings in a book that I'm working. Harvard Business Review is going to publish it in 9 months. It's called Return on Character. I was like, oh man, what an awesome title, The Return on High Character Leadership. He said, would you read it for me and can we discuss it? I would like to get your perspective on it. So now I was spending time with family and spending time still before the Lord, training for an Ironman, and spending a little time with Fred. And what ended up happening, that wasn't work. I just was reading his book and talking about it. I didn't realize what I thought was halftime 10 years earlier wasn't halftime. I was in a hockey game, not a football game. I had, Fred after the first period, and now I had a Fred for a whole nother year after the second period, and I was excited about learning about these leadership. He said, his premise of his book was that character is not this internal fluffy thing. Character will always come out in your behavior, and it can be observed. And it can be observed by surveys by enough people around you, and it can be measured. And if it can be measured, it can be equated to ultimately the results of an organization. Return on Character by Fred Keel. And his premise was that character is defined by leaders practicing 4 keystone character habits: integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion. And then he very well articulated what each of those leads to. So like, forgiveness, you don't think of that as being an important leadership character, but he said without forgiveness, there is no innovation because people are afraid to go out and take that risk. Okay, without compassion, you won't get loyalty. It's your caring for the folks that you're working with actually results in a loyalty or a caring that comes back. And he was just excellent at defining all of these results. And he specifically was able to measure those results on a curve, and he called it the character curve. And it looked like an S, sort of a flat S. And at the high right end of the curve, the top 10% of all the leaders that he had studied that returned the greatest financial results and got the best character scores, he called those virtuoso leaders because they had mastered the art of leadership. And at the bottom 10%, the worst of the worst leaders, what do you think he called them? Did he call them, they're not virtuoso, so they're the untalented leaders, or maybe they're the bad leaders, or the tyrants? No, he had a specific phrase, and that phrase had impact on me. He described the worst of the worst leaders in his research as self-focused leaders. That was the term he used. Because he said, ultimately, in all of those bad behaviors, they all went back to one source, according to his research, and that they were self-focused. And I ate this stuff up. I was training for my Ironman. I was actually starting to get kind of antsy. I was going to take a year off, but I had only taken about 4 months off. I was 20 weeks into my 24-week training plan before I was going to do Ironman Madison. And one day I was riding my bike training down the road, and a car turned when I wasn't expected, and we hit head on. And the next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. And shortly thereafter, I was released, and my plans had changed. And I wasn't able to walk. Didn't really know what the future held for me. All I know is I'd worked my butt off on this Ironman, and I was hoping to one day go back to work, and I really didn't know what was going to happen. And I started to get into a depression because my plan wasn't being achieved. And one morning I was having a quiet time, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that I was mourning my plan, and I had yet to celebrate being alive. I was saved, and I hadn't really celebrated that fact yet. And there was one other thing that God was screaming out to me that morning. You said you wanted to be still before the Lord. There you go. Okay, you are still before the Lord. You're welcome. All right. So I was going to take a little bit more time off than I thought. I went through rehab. And I certainly wasn't going to make Ironman Madison, but I still felt like I wanted to achieve one, and so I signed up for another Ironman months later, and I ended up having to travel to Mexico, and I ended up doing it. And that was 7 months into my time off. I got back on a Sunday. Monday morning, I got a telephone call from Jamf. It said, we're recruiting for a CEO. We'd like to talk to you about it. I said, hey, I learned my lesson. I am taking a year off, all right? Next time a bus is going to hit me. I'm taking a year off, but I'd be happy to chat with you about it because I'd heard of Jamf and I was very impressed with them. They said, that's fine and dandy. We actually want to recruit for the position. We're not sure you're right for it either. I said, well, let's talk over the next few months, and we'll see where we end up landing. You recruit, and I'll talk to you. And we developed a relationship I did with the founders over the next 5 months. We talked very informally for 5 months. I had a few interviews, but more and more. I wasn't going to repeat what I did with Kroll. I wasn't going to jump into something. I was going to make sure that this was somewhere God wanted me to be. And I became more and more certain that that's where God wanted me to be. To the point that on the day, and it was actually a year and about 2 weeks from the time that I left my prior employer, I went out to dinner with the two founders of Jamf, and we had not once in those 5 months, had we talked about what I made in my prior jobs, what my expectations were from a compensation perspective. I just had developed such a trust for these individuals that Chip Pearson, who is one of the founders, Zach Homestead, who's actually from here, Eau Claire, the other founder, held up an enclosed envelope that said, in here is your offer letter to come be CEO of Jamf. And I reached out and I grabbed it and I put it down and I said, I accept. Didn't need to look in it. Didn't really care what was in it. And that is not a statement of me and my faith. That is a statement of how much trust I had built up for these individuals and the kind of people that they were. And I knew that this was the spot that I was going to be. And I knew that what I wanted to do at Jamf was going to be leading according to the lessons that Fred taught me during transition, or what do they call it between hockey periods? What's that? Intermission. Is that it? I'm not a big hockey guy. I know there's 3 periods though. Intermission 1, intermission 2. What Fred had taught me, I was going to try to lead that way. And history will be the judge. I don't know if other people perceive that or not. I don't know where I would plot on the character curve. All I know is that I'm battling that leadership battle every single day right along with you. And that character curve, the self-focused leaders, when I think about that, and I go back once again to Ken Johnson's advice, don't act like a manager, I actually have a completely different perspective today. That maybe don't act like a manager is quite simply, don't be so full of yourself. You know, leadership is not about you. Leadership is about something else. As a matter of fact, I'd like to just read a passage if I can actually see it. It's out of Romans. It was advice from Paul that he was writing to the Romans 12:8. And he talks about spiritual gifts. And he writes, if your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. And if God has given you the leadership ability, then man, enjoy the perks. Oh wait, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say, oh man, you're special. It doesn't say that either. It says if you're given the gift of leadership, take the responsibility seriously. It doesn't say anything about leaders being special. It says that leaders are doing something special. They have a special, important role. But they're no more special than the person who's writing the code or the person who's putting together the parts. As a matter of fact, in many, many, many ways, they're more special. I can't do what they do. I can't solve a customer's problem the way that they can. I'm just serving a specific role within the company, and I shouldn't be so full of myself. So often, I love the title of this session, Leading with Power. It's a great title, but too many leaders are out there leading for power. They think leadership is attempting to attain greater power, but that's not what leadership is about. Leadership is about making others more powerful, helping them become more powerful, empowerment. It is all about the people that you're leading, and it is not about us in any way, shape, or form. If you want to pray one prayer every single day, I actually try and pray this prayer frequently, and it's John 3:30. He must become greater, I must become less. It's speaking about our relationship with God. So what I pray is, may you become greater, may I become less. May you become greater, may I become less. And what happens when that happens? What they're really talking about is in your spirit. Are you dominating your spirit, or are you letting God dominate your spirit? And if you do let God just take over your spirit, what's important to God? People. So if He takes over your spirit, what's going to be important to you? People. That's what leadership is about. It is not about attaining power. If God takes over your spirit, then you are definitely leading with power. And I know that sounds a little bit preachy, but let me remind you the way I started. I am in this journey with you. I am battling every single day because I am a flawed human being. So, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate your attentiveness.